Hi, good afternoon. We're in the Warwickshire countryside and hopefully we're going to beat the rain that's going to come in the next few days. I'm here with Roland Robinson and we're going to have a look at his wonderful Ariel 600 Square Four. So let me just ask Roland a few questions first of all. Roland, you've been tinkering, that's not the word, is it? Tinkering, heavily tinkering with Ariel Square Fours for how long?
That's a very good question. You should give me time to think of these answers. Since 1957.
1957. And how did you get tinkering with Square Fours?
I used to visit the Science Museum and there was a sectioned engine for a overhead cam Square Four in there. I thought, that's an interesting design. I wonder where I could get one of those from to play with. And what one came out for sale in our local paper.
Oh, nice.
And far too much money for me. I was still at school.
Oh.
But my father was interested because he'd had a motorcycle before.
Yes.
And so it did have a sidecar on it. So he bought it. And it proved to be fairly unreliable, which they were noted for at the time. So that's how tinkering started.
Okay. Good. So when did you actually... Because I know that you've got several engines knocking about, haven't you? But this is an early one, isn't it? It's a 1934.
Correct.
600cc. And it's an overhead cam. We'll have a little walk around in a bit and we can point out some of the features of this absolutely gorgeous bike. When did you actually purchase this one? And of course, it didn't come in one piece, did it?
No, it was boxes of bits, as they often are. Fortunately, virtually all of it was there. I had enough knowledge of them to know what I was looking at,
right,
to know there was not going to be too much missing.
Yeah.
And it was purchased in 2005, I think it was.
2005?
Yeah, yes.
2005, okay, so that's 15 years ago. And do you want to tell us how much you paid for it, or is that going to be top secret?
I paid £6,000 for it.
£6,000 back in 2005. It was in a box of bits.
Mm.
So what was missing really at that time? Was there any major pieces missing?
No major pieces, they're all little things.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it did have a headlight, but an incorrect one, but subsequently managed to find the correct one for that year, so I wasn't too bothered about that.
All right. The major things then, Roland, that we've had to do with this?
Major things?
Yes.
Well, everything's been looked at.
Right.
Stainless steel has been used almost universally throughout.
Right.
So that meant things like wheel spindles were chucked away, and the wheel rims have been replaced, and the spokes, so they're stainless.
Right.
But it did have the originals. I still have the originals somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Now the engine, have you had any mod cons? Because I think I remember when I talked to you last year, you'd fitted an electronic ignition, or is that right?
It has electronic ignition, yes.
Right.
I was aware that things have improved, of course, more recently, but at the time I was aware of problems with this type of magneto in the heat behind the engine there. Although in the early one, way back in 57, never had any problems with that aspect of it, which is interesting.
Right. Now you've taken this bike everywhere, haven't you? I mean, you've been on some real journeys with this. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your journeys?
Well, it's been to the continent several times.
Right.
Sometimes ridden, sometimes trailered because of my partner's health at the time. Mm-hmm. It's been ridden up to Scotland and Yorkshire. It's been down to Cornwall. That wasn't ridden then, though it was planned to later this year. This year, but of course lockdown ruined everything.
Yeah, it's changed everybody's lives, hasn't it? Okay. So let's have a bit of a walk around and perhaps we can note some of the features. First of all, it's a wet sump, isn't it? So the oil is filled down there.
Yes.
And the tank is very... I mean, this is all original, isn't it? But it's very much like Harley Davidson. They plop their dials, don't they, in the middle of the fuel tank. But
who
Ariel
preceded who?
Well, exactly, yeah. Who was there first? Do we know the answer to that? Or?
I don't know the answer to that. No. Somebody will...
Okay. let's have a stroll around anyway and have a little look at some of the features. Well, first of all, of course, we've got girder forks, haven't we?
Yes.
Do we know the make of the girder forks?
Well, they're Ariel's own.
Ariel's own?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this was the first motorcycle that I ever rode with girder forks, and I was expecting quite a lumpy procedure there, but I found them very, very good. I found that the headlight was a long way in front, but I found the girder forks work really, really well. Now, the 4 cylinders feed into 2 pipes, don't they?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Let's just have a stroll around this side and where the sun is. So, the brakes, the front brake, we have is it a single leading shoe?
Yes, it's a single leading shoe.
All right.
It's quite an effective brake, surprisingly enough. That particular one isn't the original. I have the original, and it could be put back very easily because it was made of pressed steel, whereas that is a club-made cast iron one.
Right, good. Now there are some adjustments on the forks by the looks of it. So this star, what does that do?
That just adds extra damping to the bouncing motion, should you need it.
Yeah. Now it's a beautiful red, and you say originally these mainly came out black, but
Correct,
some were red. Now, of course, let's carry on.
Red would be available to order if you were prepared to wait long enough.
Right. Was it extra?
It would probably be extra.
Paid extra for red.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when I was here last summer, you said you asked me to find the carburettor, didn't you? And I couldn't find the carburettor because it's right at the front here, isn't it?
Yes.
And you tickled that to get that going. But it started first time this morning. After how many months of not running?
Since October of last year, early October last year.
All right. Now the early ones, oddly enough, are overhead cam, and this is where the chain drives the overhead cam, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And later on, of course, the Square Fours went from 600cc to 1000cc, and they went actually sort of like back in time to push rods.
Correct.
Okay. Then we have a separate gearbox.
Yes,
Is that a Burman gearbox?
Standard Burman gearbox.
Standard Burman gearbox.
Ariel used, and several other manufacturers.
Yeah. Well, Burman made gearboxes for BSA and...
no, I don't think they made them from BSA.
Did they?
No.
Oh,
AMC, Panther.
Royal Enfield.
No, Enfield made Albion gearboxes.
Did they? Okay. So, back wheel, is that a quickly detachable back wheel?
That's a later quickly detachable rear wheel as well, which didn't come in until 35. This is the pre-war version with only 3 nuts holding it on, the 2 parts together. Post-war they had 5.
Right. Now my wife's happily there going round the other side of the bike. Did you do the clocks, Jane?
Yeah.
Because the clocks are just, I think the clocks are absolutely like gorgeous. Any other interesting features, Roland, before we give it a bit of a start up?
I have enlarged, well, to really take up any potential wear for the oil pump, I've increased the plunger diameter from 1/4 inch to 5/16 of an inch. Have the pistons machined and fitted an oil control ring
Right.
to it, and that has made a dramatic difference to the oil consumption. Incredible.
Do you have a modern battery on this? I know it's a...
This is a lithium-ion battery on this. Yes.
Is it in a traditional battery case?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I think it would be nice to hear it going.
Can be arranged.
That is an absolutely beautiful tick over when you think it hasn't been going for several months. Well, I think the only thing now, Roland, is to take the beast for a ride. So we're finally away on the Ariel 600, and I love this bike as soon as I saw it last year. It's loud, so I don't know whether you're going to catch, hopefully, my voice. I'll try and keep the revs down low, but it's a bit of a throaty beast. The girder forks, as I said earlier on, work well, but the seat feels really quite strange. Let me just get the mirror adjusted right. But this engine pulls really well. Sitting on it, it feels like you're on a Harley Davidson. I've now pressed the silent running mode button. I always fit these to my bikes. Now that I've successfully roared off towards the sunset, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Robert Davies, Rob to my pals, and I'm a regular contributor both writing and photography to Classic Bike Guide and the Classic Motorcycle in the UK, and sometimes to Real Classics. I tend to focus on restorations and interviews, covering mainly classic bikes from the 1940s through to 1990. But as you can see, this early Square Four falls more happily into the vintage period. Still, it's a fabulous machine, and I'm proud to show it off, and grateful to Roland Robinson for the use of his precious motorcycle. 3 years ago, I also wrote Custom Rides, the coolest motorcycle builds around the world. A book that features some beautiful bikes and the build information. Look for it on Amazon. Where else? The engine for this bike was a fabulous idea back in 1928, when a young, talented and keen Edward Turner of late Triumph fame was hawking his drawings of a 4-cylinder motorcycle to anyone who would listen to his pitch. Ariel, under Jack Sangster, took up the challenge, and lo, a 500cc prototype was produced that in the autumn of 1930 created quite a stir amongst the motorcycling fraternity. The beauty was in the compactness of the engine, but a compactness that was in some ways, according to many scribes, its Achilles heel. And so, not wishing to look a complete idiot, I read several accounts of the machine before driving down to Roland's. This personal study, I fervently hoped, would stand me in good stead. It didn't. Roland threw open the door to his capacious garage to reveal part of what I came to realise as the day went on was more of a small one-man museum of ancient and classic bikes than anything else. It was an enviable collection of classic metal. Now in Stratford country, the Bard of Avon. This is what classic motorcycling is all about. I do love this tank, even though I've stuck my map to the bottom. Really loving this. These are the B roads, by the way. Narrow little roads in the middle of the Warwickshire countryside, and the trees of course are in full leaf at the moment. It's the start of August, and if it wasn't for lockdown, life would be wonderful. Golden fields of wheat. The very first time I met Roland, he took me on a quick tour of his sheds and outhouses, finding engines, motorcycles in bits or whole under wraps, and useful engineering machines. It was all a bit much to take in. In one room lay 3 early Square Four engines, each waiting patiently for the magic restoring touch from Roland's hands. "When do you think you'll get round to these?" I asked politely, not wishing to point out that he was a gentleman in his 70s, and that there was enough work lying around for 10 men half his age. "Oh, some day," he replied wistfully, and then went on to relate what he had to do to get the Cammy model roadworthy. The engine had been stripped and completely rebuilt, while some new parts like repro mudguards were purchased. The old cam was worn, so a new one from the Ariel Owners Club, an excellent club for support by the way, was also bought. Indeed, the club can supply many parts for a whole range of Ariels, made new, and indeed I believe they also supply some to Dragonfly.
Well, that sorted that out. The fuel tap had turned off. But we get these problems and we overcome them.
In happy conclusion then, I will relate that between 1930 and 1958, the date when the very last Mark II four pipers came out, this bike had gone through several redesigns. Yes, the original 2x2 cylinder layout had remained the same, but everything else had radically altered. For a start, Roland's 1934 model was overhead cam. The last model was push-rod operated. Seems like a reversal of progress, that. The early models had a large wet sump with horizontally split crankcases, whereas the later sported a 1 gallon separate oil tank and vertically split cases. And of course the suspension went through some changes too, from rigid and girder forks to telescopic forks and plunger rear end. But I love this early square reel, and I hope you do too. And yes, it's just as exotic as the day it came out. Now if you're starting to get all keen and interested, the Ariel Owners Club is no doubt the place to start. I'll just leave you with a few tantalising stills. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see what I have for you in 2 weeks' time. This is the Classic Motorcycle Channel with Rob Davies. Oh, and the camera girl, Jane.